When Jesus was just 12 years old, he got lost and completely stranded from his family. This story is so interesting. I was just reading it. It is very eye-opening, especially because you don't get to hear a lot of stories about Jesus when he was a teenager and when he was growing up. So this is found in Luke chapter 2, verse 41. I recommend reading it for yourself, but this is a great way to spend some time with God. And this story actually links back into our own personal relationships with God and how we could set off on the path that God has called us to. So I'm just going to be going over this and explaining the story. I'm going to try to make this video as short as possible. So I'm just going to go over all of this really quickly. Jesus and his mother and father, Joseph and Mary, they were returning from the Passover festival, which was held in Jerusalem. So they're walking back to their hometown in Nazareth. And something you should know is that when they traveled in big groups. So probably several families traveling in like wagons and caravans. So there were many families all around. They're all traveling back to their hometown. And at first, Joseph and Mary kind of just assumed that Jesus was off socializing and playing with the other boys his age because, again, there were many families. So they just kind of assumed he was somewhere else, but he was still traveling with the group. But he did not show up after a few hours, and they probably started to get worried. 3 days passed, and they were just frantic. They were searching for him everywhere, asking family and friends where Jesus had gone, and just searching in every place they could possibly try to find him, and they could not find Jesus. And Jesus did not turn up. So they knew that Jesus was chosen. So that must have made them even more protective and even more like in a panic mode because they knew that Jesus was special and that losing him could be a big deal. And after 3 days, his parents have been searching for him everywhere, just like in panic mode. They didn't know what to think. And finally, they went into this temple and they saw Jesus sitting there. After he hadn't returned home for 3 days, he was sitting there asking the religious leaders questions and listening to them. And they were confused. They were hurt. They didn't know what to think. Why was their son sitting in a temple when he probably knows they were worried sick about him? So Mary goes up to her son and she asks him, "Why have you done this to us? We have been frantically searching everywhere for you." And I think Jesus' answer in verse 49 is really funny, and it's kind of like he's stating the obvious. He says, "But why did you need to search? Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" I love what he says. It's like so blatantly obvious. Like, didn't you know I must be in this temple? Like, isn't it obvious? But his parents did not understand. It says in the next verse that they did not understand. It kind of flew over their heads. They didn't understand why Jesus was sitting here in a temple when he could have been with his family doing something else. They just didn't understand. And I'm sure they were confused, and I'm sure they were hurt, and I'm sure they were angry. But this actually ties back into our own lives, and I'm going to explain how. I took a lot of things from this story, but the main thing is that quiet time with the Father is so important. Our quiet time with God is so important that we should make it a priority. And you see here in the story how Jesus made his quiet time with God a priority. He went to the temple when he knows his parents were probably going to be worried sick about him, and when he could have been playing with his friends or helping his parents out when they were returning from the Passover festival. He could have been doing anything else, but he chose to spend time with God and learn more about God by listening and asking questions of these religious leaders. If Jesus had gone with the flow, he wouldn't have ended up in the temple. He wouldn't have ended up learning the things he had learned in those 3 days. He couldn't go with the flow. He had a calling from God, and in the same way, we can tend to go with the flow, go with what everyone else thinks, but at the same time, we're ignoring the whispers that God gives us along the way. And I'm not saying to ignore your family and friends. Listen to them, but also make room for God's voice in your life. If Jesus would have just gone with the flow, gone with everyone who was traveling back to Nazareth, he wouldn't have ended up in the temple, and maybe he wouldn't have ended up learning everything he did in those 3 days. In the same way, we can lose sight of what's important in our lives when people are saying stuff to us, when there are so many voices in the world that we don't know which one to listen to. But ultimately, they should not influence what God is saying to us. He speaks to us. He calls us to do things, and they might seem strange to your family and friends, but remember that God is a priority. Follow what he has for you because it is greater than any advice that anyone else could ever give you. And I'm not saying don't listen to your family and friends. Listen to them, but make room for God's voice in your life. And so yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. I hope this video didn't run too long, but I do recommend checking out that story for yourself. It's in Luke chapter 2, verse 41. It's super interesting. I kept on going back to it just because it was such a good story about Jesus' youth and how he was growing up. And if you're growing up right now, you're in the same stage that Jesus was in, it's a very good story. So go read that, check that out. I totally recommend it. And yeah, if you like this video, drop an amen in the comments. Follow me for more, and I hope you have a blessed day.